Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, June 19th, 2023. Happy Juneteenth. Today we are going to be talking about the 2024 Senate elections and the impact and influence of President Donald Trump being on the ballot as a potential detriment to the Republicans running in these highly competitive races. Now, there have been articles over the past few months discussing Donald Trump being at the top of the ticket, being the mainstream Republican candidate across the United States, and how Republicans are worried about the Trump down ballot drag. Essentially, what they are worried about is that Donald Trump's influence within the party, his top name recognition, and being at the front of the ballot will make voters ultimately unwilling to vote for some Republicans further down the line because of their close alignment. What that essentially means is that if there is a moderate Republican who is in the state, for example, Pennsylvania, who is running alongside Donald Trump and has to campaign with him, has to endorse his policies to get into these rallies, to get the support from the Trump campaign, to get the strategy, to get whatever it might be, they are now one and the same. Regardless of how moderate they may seem, they will ultimately be associated with President Donald Trump. This happened very evidently in the 2022 midterm elections. Had Donald Trump's influence not been within this election, I think the Democrats might have lost control of the U.S. Senate, and I say that for a number of reasons that we will get to later on down in the video. But it is really difficult to see any voters on the moderate sense of the independent spectrum within the United States that they would vote for a candidate that if they are not voting for Donald Trump, that aligns themselves so closely and so heavily with them. It's the reason why Glenn Youngkin in the state of Virginia refused to allow Donald Trump to even campaign with him at a rally. And that was a problem. That was a problem, at least, for Donald Trump, but ultimately, it worked out. Virginia was a state, for context, that Joe Biden won by 10 points, and the Republicans were trying to reclaim the governorship. And the only way they could do that was by not tapping into that anger and hatred towards the former president. And ultimately, it worked out. But in 2024, that may be unavoidable. You see, Mitch McConnell is currently discussing on CNN and other news outlets about not screwing up the 2024 Senate elections, but it might not be entirely in his control. I can explain that more so looking back in a reflective sense on 2022. In 2022, Donald Trump took a very hands-on approach at hand-picking these Republican candidates. I think a lot of it was really him trying to pivot and, put himself in a good position for 2024. Had these Republicans won their Senate races, he would have the backing of numerous senators straight from the get-go because he had faith in them, so they will have faith in him. It's sort of a standard quid pro quo, but it was very evident to see what was happening at this point. States such as Pennsylvania, where Dr. Oz was shoved into the race, seeing what we saw Dave McCormick in the race, you saw Kathy Barnett, you saw other people entering in, even his former ambassador to Denmark, who served within the administration. Dr. Oz was propped up by Donald Trump and ultimately lost to John Fetterman. It's the case that can be seen in the state of Georgia. Herschel Walker was propped up. Donald Trump endorsed him before he was even considering a bid for Senate, months before he even announced. In Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, though he did win, was pushed to run by former President Donald Trump, pressuring him from all sides, even getting Mitch McConnell to call him up, even though Ron Johnson originally promised that he would not serve a third term. He said that in 2016, and he originally was intending, at least so it seems, to not be running. You can see that with the way the campaign really didn't kick off until the beginning of 2022. For months in 2021, even when the speculation was high rise, his website was still outdated back to 2016. His branding, his campaign staff had yet to be hired, and it was done in a last-minute effort, and it ultimately was successful. But because Donald Trump pushed him into the race, this is where you start to see the sphere of influence going across the United States. It happened with Ted Budd in North Carolina. Donald Trump pushed him to the nomination, and he won. But in Pennsylvania and Georgia, they weren't so lucky. In Arizona, they weren't so lucky. In Nevada, they weren't so lucky. New Hampshire, same thing. The point is that the candidates that were propped up by Donald Trump were largely propped up to help Donald Trump in 2024. And now that they are no longer there, he is probably going to do the same exact thing this time around in the event that he wins the presidency. I don't think he wants to be at odds with many other Republicans, especially Republicans in leadership, because that doesn't make sense. But we cannot understate how the 2024 Senate elections are set up in a way that are so beneficial to the Republican Party. On your map right now, or on your screen right now, is a map of the United States Senate elections up in 2024. 47 of them I automatically declare as safe and solid for the Republican Party. In fact, I might move West Virginia into that column as well, potentially Texas and Florida, and where does that put you? Back up to 50? The Democrats are at 39. CNN recently released the list of the 10 Senate seats most likely to flip in 2024. And the shocking thing about this, or maybe not so much if you've been closely watching politics, but the shocking thing about it is that it is so non-traditional. In 8 out of the 10 seats most likely to flip in 2024, they are currently held by Democrats. 10 seats, and 80% of them are held by Democrats. We can see where these competitive states lie. And Democrats are going to be fighting this down ballot benefit that Donald Trump provides in states like West Virginia and Montana and Ohio. But what they are also going to be benefiting from is that he doesn't provide as much of a down ballot benefit as someone like Ron DeSantis or even Ted Cruz or even Nikki Haley, to be quite frank. A more moderate, or at least more moderately presenting, because a lot of them have the same politics, just can market it a little bit better to be perceived as moderates by comparison. They could benefit the Republicans by pushing them closer to the finish line. These Democrats have lasted in these seats for years, potentially even decades, because of how successful they have been at winning over these electorates, even if they vote differently on the presidential level. But this time, I think Donald Trump will be, in many ways, a drag, at least as it stands currently, because he is not the most electable Republican. This Senate race, these Senate elections should be a shoo-in, and the reason I also make that, use that language is because 2022 should have been as well. This is the 2020 Senate elections, when the Democrats won 50-50, and they won the House 222 to 213. We knew by the next election, both chambers would flip. We knew that because 2022 was geared up to be an even worse year for Democrats. They were defending territory in areas of the country that were close and competitive in 2020. The House elections, redistricting benefited the Republican Party. They had a 100-seat advantage in terms of redistricting, in terms of partisan and toss-ups. But ultimately, the House flipped by just a net gain of about 10 seats. And then in the Senate, the easiest possibility for Republicans, all they needed was 1 seat. It wasn't like 2018 when Democrats needed, they needed 2 seats. In 2020, they were going to need 3 seats, right? And they got that. They got the 3 seats. But in 2022, Republicans couldn't even get 1. And in fact, they lost a seat. They lost a seat because of the impact of Donald Trump. So when I say this Senate election should be a shoo-in for Republicans, I mean it because it should be right now. But I don't know what that brings because of the impact of one common denominator in 2018, 2020, and now 2022, and that is President Donald Trump. So taking a further look, and also especially since he is doing so well in the 2024 nomination, we can practically assume that at this point in time, elections held today, all the primaries occur, the convention nomination process all said and done within 24 hours, Donald Trump is the next president, or next presidential nominee for the Republican Party. But we have to wait to get there. But in terms of the rating of the competitive seats, I want to just go ahead and show you just how insane this is to think about. That Democrats truly can only rely on reasonably, I guess with Amy Klobuchar and Angus King, can rely on just 41 seats. Republicans, on the contrary, can rely on 47 and more reasonably can rely on 48. Now, looking at the Senate races, the interesting thing about this is that these are the same ones that were up in 2018. I don't have the 2018 map for you. I wish I did. But what I will tell you is that Democrats did quite well. But even then, they could not overcome the partisanship. But I will say, because Donald Trump was the president of the United States, because Donald Trump was here, combined with the Democratic incumbent, states that went to him overwhelmingly in 2016 and 2020 were close in 2018. For instance, the state of Indiana was decided by 5 points. Missouri was decided by 6. North Dakota was decided by 10. For comparison, in 2016, Donald Trump won Indiana by 19, Missouri by 20, and North Dakota by over 30. To see them narrow down that significantly was a testament that Donald Trump being at the helm of the presidency, essentially being at the top of the ballot, because that's what midterm elections are largely perceived and taken as a way to push back on the incumbent, voters did. And it wasn't enough to say that Democrats were able to retain these Senate seats, but it was enough to say that there was an impact, a negative impact of Donald Trump's influence. Same thing can be said in the state of Tennessee. That narrowed down to a likely margin. It was about 10 points. It's a state that Republicans routinely win by 30 or more. The state of West Virginia, surprisingly enough, went to the Democrats by 3 points. Joe Manchin won a state that was the largest margin of victory for Donald Trump, I think besides the state of Wyoming, in 2016, and then in 2020 became the largest margin, about a 40-point difference. Donald Trump got about 67 to 70% of the vote. Joe Biden received about 27%. So for West Virginia to have gone blue is definitely interesting. But now these are red states. They are not going to the Democrats, and that means Republicans can practically rely on them. But it also means that they need top-tier candidates elsewhere. Because if 2022 proved us anything, it's that in most of the competitive House races, and in most of the competitive Senate races, and in most of the competitive governor races, Democrats won. And that is a problem for Republicans, because they need everybody to do well. And one thing, too, that Donald Trump really did, besides the fact that he wasn't even on the ballot, that dragged down Republicans was these endorsements. I mentioned this with Dr. Oz, I mentioned this with Herschel Walker, but it's happening again. When you look at these competitive races, where do we think about in terms of truly competitive states? Nevada, for instance, right? Well, what's happening in the state of Nevada is that we are seeing currently the former Secretary of State candidate in Nevada running for Senate and is currently the front runner. He lost by an exceptional margin because he was an election denier, because the voters in Nevada did not want to back someone like him who refused to accept the results of the election. And here he is propping himself up in 2024. No doubt in my mind that Donald Trump endorses him. In Arizona, another state where you have a candidate like Kyrsten Sinema who could reasonably split the vote three ways. But the Republicans aren't exactly sending their best. Mark Lamb, Carrie Lake are not the most electable Republicans that can run in this race. That would have been Doug Ducey if his reputation had not been tarnished by yet again the common denominator, President Donald Trump. In the state of Ohio, Bernie Moreno, this should be an easily winnable race. If Moreno is the nominee, that becomes a lot harder. Why? Because he is the extremist. Right now, there's a candidate who's doing well, who is leading Bernie Moreno, but Donald Trump has already applauded Bernie Moreno, and he has received the endorsement from Senator J.D. Vance, who was also propped up by President Donald Trump. And in the state of Pennsylvania, you have the state treasurer, who is within this state, who is also seen as an extremist. Currently looks like someone who maybe isn't the most, Trumpian, most, MAGA right wing, but is certainly along those lines. And for her to win the nomination against someone like Dave McCormick, she'll probably have to rely on the same benefit and bump that Dr. Oz had, which was the endorsement of Donald Trump. These are states the Democrats want to win, and with the right candidates, could very well win them. The Republicans have so many opportunities that it is laughable at this point that we are even considering that the race is competitive. But it is, because Democrats have proven in 2018, 2020, and 2022 that the wrong GOP candidate and the right Democratic candidate in the perfect combination can help them win races that were deemed otherwise unwinnable or unlikely to be winnable. The Senate was supposed to be safe red, the House even more so, and yet the House couldn't be called for days and the Senate Democrats gained. I incorrectly predicted that Republicans would win control of the Senate in 2022. I take credit for that. I thought the House was a foregone conclusion. You were going to see 20 to 30 seats in terms of a gain for the GOP. I was wrong, as for many people, and I take responsibility for that. But if I am someone who even overestimated Republicans back in 2022, I'm looking at 2024, and now upon reflection, are seeing it with this sense of, okay, maybe it isn't that winnable for the Republican Party, even though at face value it seems very much is something we should consider as well. Because I think looking at our map in 2024, there are so many ways we could say, oh yeah, easily, the Republican Party wins, but in actuality, based off who's running, based off who's likely to win the nomination, we get a lot trickier. It also doesn't help that Democrats have really whipped their party together well to run all of their incumbents. What I mean by that is you don't see many people retiring. Who do you have? Debbie Stabenow in the state of Michigan. Okay, that's a big one, but in actuality, they have a huge bench. Jocelyn Benson, Elisa Slotkin, whoever it might be, Democrats have electable candidates. And you look at states like Maryland and Delaware and California, and you ask yourselves, are these really the competitive races that Republicans are going to be fighting for? The answer is no. The Democrats have their incumbents running in the states that matter. It's the same thing they did in 2022, just one Democratic retirement to 5 on the GOP side. And one of those GOP retirements resulted in Democrats winning the Pennsylvania Senate race. In 2024, they got their party together and they realized that because someone like Tammy Baldwin is electable and is well-liked, they will likely win re-election, and they probably push, and largely in part because the candidate wanted to, but also was definitely pushing and advocating for a re-election bid by Senator Baldwin. Same thing with Amy Klobuchar in the state of Minnesota. Bob Casey could have easily exited the race. He could have easily withdrew himself if he thought the race was not winnable, but he absolutely thinks it's winnable, and so do national Democrats, which is why he's in this race. Angus King in the state of Maine. You can see it here. Looking at the state of Nevada, you have an incumbent running again. John Tester even, coming from a state that Donald Trump is likely going to win by double digits in 2024. If he is the nominee, John Tester is running. Why? Because he's popular. If he gave it up, it would be safe red from the start. West Virginia, Joe Manchin is running, but realistically, I don't think he's going to win. Texas and Florida are two states that Republicans can reasonably do well in. I think they would have a good shot in 2024. Democrats, I think, would win New Mexico. I do think they would win Nevada, but New Mexico, Virginia, and Michigan. And where does that bring us? 50 to 50. Now, this is contingent on a lot of factors going the right way for the Democratic Party. The 2024 Senate elections, I think, start at a default in favor of the GOP just by the nature of these seats and where they are, and what Donald Trump's impact on the ballot will still benefit the Republican Party, but in many ways be a detriment. I think if you had another Republican on the ballot that wasn't Donald Trump, these races would look a lot different. I think Montana would be gone. I think Ohio would be gone. And I think you could pick away some other states too, depending on the Republican performance on the presidential level. Maybe Nevada could finally flip. Arizona with a three-way race. And where does that bring Republicans? 54 to 46, even if Democrats maintain the blue wall, win Virginia, win Maine, win New Mexico. And ultimately, it's still an overwhelming majority for the GOP. This is what it should look like if they played their cards correctly and somebody besides President Trump was at the top of the ticket. They can still win the Senate, absolutely, with Donald Trump, but it will be that much harder. Because it isn't just him that comes along with the Trump train. It's all of his losing candidates from before and losing candidates that will lose in 2024 if they win the nomination. And Donald Trump being on the same ballot, even on that primary, endorsing them, getting his supporters out against DeSantis, against Christie, against whoever it might be, you will see a tremendous electoral benefit for these less electable Republicans on the primary ballot. And that's the exact type of perfect storm that happened in 2018, that happened in 2020, and especially happened in 2022 that Democrats, quite frankly, seem to be counting on to maintain control of the U.S. Senate. And it might just work for the fourth time in a row. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.